Behind every silent struggle lies a story waiting to roar. The sound of their laughter still echoes in my head some nights. Sharp, dismissive, cutting through my explanations like a knife through butter. Drama queen, they called me. Attention seeker. Always making mountains out of molehills. That's the thing about family. They think they know you better than you know yourself. But sometimes the person they see at Sunday dinners is just a fragment, a carefully constructed sliver of who you really are. I wasn't always good at hiding. When I was younger, I wore my heart on my sleeve, let my emotions flood every room I entered. That was before I learned that vulnerability in my family was like blood in shark-infested waters. My father would roll his eyes. My mother would sigh that familiar sigh that said, "Here we go again." My brothers would exchange knowing glances, as if my feelings were some inside joke only they understood. "You have it easy, Alex," my father said during our last family dinner 6 months ago. I had just mentioned being overwhelmed with work. Not complaining, just stating a fact over mashed potatoes and pot roast. When I was your age, I was working 2 jobs and raising a family. You live alone in that fancy apartment downtown, answering emails all day. What do you have to be stressed about? The table erupted in agreement. My mother piled more food onto my plate, her universal solution to life's problems. My older brother Marcus chimed in with his favorite refrain. "The problem with your generation is you've never faced real hardship." I stabbed at my potatoes. 32 years of practice restraint keeping my mouth shut. They didn't know that my fancy apartment was a 450-square-foot studio with a leaking ceiling and temperamental heat. They didn't know about the 60-hour work weeks or the second job I had taken on 6 months prior. They certainly didn't know about the community center on 8th and Pine, where I spent every free moment I had. It wasn't always this way. There was a time when I tried to show them who I really was, tried to make them understand. But each attempt was met with the same dismissive responses, the same assumptions that my life was easy, my problems trivial, my successes handed to me on a silver platter. "You're so dramatic, Alex," my mother said, pouring more gravy onto my already drowning plate. "Your father is right. You don't know what struggle is." Something inside me snapped that night, not in a violent way, but in the way a dam finally gives after years of pressure, releasing everything that had been held back. I placed my fork down gently against the china plate, the good ones, reserved for Sunday dinners, and looked around at the faces of my family. "You're right," I said quietly. "You have no idea what struggle is for me, because you've never bothered to find out." I left early that night, ignoring my mother's pleas to stay for dessert, my father's irritated comments about sensitivity. For 6 months, I declined their invitations, sent brief responses to group texts, and made excuses for missed birthdays and holidays. I needed space. More importantly, I needed time to finish what I had started 2 years ago, what I had kept hidden from them all this time. The first panic attack hit me during my senior year of college. 1 minute, I was sitting in the library, studying for finals, and the next, I couldn't breathe. My heart hammered against my ribs like it was trying to escape. I was convinced I was dying. The campus health center called it anxiety and gave me some breathing techniques and a referral to a therapist I couldn't afford. I never told my family. My father had worked in a steel mill for 40 years, coming home with hands so callous they felt like sandpaper when he would ruffle my hair. My mother had cleaned houses while raising 4 kids. In their world, anxiety wasn't a real condition. It was a weakness, an indulgence. So I learned to manage on my own. I finished college, got a job at a marketing firm downtown, and tried to outrun the anxiety that seemed to always be nipping at my heels. For a while it worked, or at least I convinced myself it did. Then came the layoffs. Not me. I was lucky, but watching half my colleagues pack up their desks affected me more than I expected. The panic attacks returned with a vengeance. There were days I couldn't leave my apartment, paralyzed by a fear I couldn't name or explain. It was during one of these episodes that Mrs. Abernathy from 3B knocked on my door. She needed help carrying groceries up the stairs. The elevator was out again, and I was the only neighbor home during the day. Helping her gave me something to focus on besides a tightness in my chest. For those 15 minutes, the anxiety retreated. The next day, she asked if I would mind helping her neighbor too, an elderly veteran who couldn't manage the stairs on his bad days. I said yes without hesitation. One neighbor became 2, became 5, became a regular volunteer position at the local community center where many of the neighborhood seniors gathered. I discovered something about myself during those early days of volunteering. Helping others helped me. When I was focused on someone else's needs, the vice grip of anxiety loosened its hold. So I leaned into it. I started spending every lunch break at the center, then evenings, then weekends. The community center on 8th and Pine wasn't much to look at. A converted warehouse with fluorescent lighting and linoleum floors that had seen better days decades ago. But within those walls, I found purpose. I helped seniors navigate Medicare forms and technology. I taught basic computer skills to those looking for jobs. I organized transportation for medical appointments. 6 months after my first visit, the director approached me with an idea. We got all these seniors with a lifetime of skills, she said, and all these younger folks in the neighborhood who could benefit from learning them. What if we created a skill exchange program? That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with possibilities. By morning, I had the outline for Bridge the Gap, a program where seniors would teach traditional skills, cooking, sewing, basic home repairs, gardening, while younger participants would offer technology lessons, help with heavy lifting, or simply provide companionship. We launched with 12 participants in a corner of the community center. Within 3 months, we had outgrown the space. By 6 months, we had a waiting list and had expanded to 2 additional centers in neighboring communities. Local news did a small feature on us. A community foundation offered a modest grant, all while my family thought I was just answering emails all day at my marketing job. It wasn't that I deliberately kept Bridge the Gap a secret from them. In the beginning, it didn't seem important enough to mention. Later, when it began to take up more of my time and energy, I tried to bring it up at family dinners. I've been volunteering at this community center, I said once, only to have Marcus interrupt with a story about his son's soccer tournament. I'm helping run this program for seniors. I mentioned another time, but my mother was more interested in why I wasn't dating anyone. Eventually, I stopped trying. It was easier than facing their indifference or, worse, their dismissal of something that had become so important to me. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, embossed lettering on heavy cream cardstock. The Community Foundation of Greater Springfield invites you to the annual Community Impact Awards. Bridge the Gap was being honored with the Innovation in Community Service Award, which included a substantial grant to expand our program citywide. My hands shook as I read the invitation. This recognition meant everything. Validation for the countless hours, the missed sleep, the maxed-out credit card I'd used to print our first brochures when funding was tight. It meant Bridge the Gap could reach more people, make a real difference on a larger scale. The ceremony was scheduled for next Sunday, the same day as my parents' 40th wedding anniversary dinner, an event that had been planned for months. I had already RSVP'd to both yes to the dinner and no to the award ceremony. Family obligations always came first. That was the unspoken rule. But as I stared at the invitation, something shifted inside me. For 2 years, I had poured my heart and soul into building something meaningful, something that helped people, something that helped me, and not once had my family shown any interest. I picked up my phone and called the foundation, changing my RSVP to a yes. Then I texted my mother. Something came up for Sunday. Can't make dinner. Will explain later. Her response was immediate. This is your father's anniversary too. Whatever it is can wait. It couldn't wait. Not this time. Sunday arrived crisp and clear, one of those perfect spring days that feels like a gift after a long winter. I stood in front of my closet, staring at the suit I had splurged on for the occasion. Navy blue with a subtle pattern, far nicer than anything I'd normally wear to a family dinner. As I adjusted my tie, my phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from my family. I silenced it and slipped it into my pocket. Tonight wasn't about them. Tonight was about Bridge the Gap and the community we'd built. The award ceremony was held at the Grand Hotel downtown, a venue I'd passed 1,000 times but never entered. Crystal chandeliers hung from ornate ceilings. casting warm light over round tables draped in white linen. I found my name card at a table near the front, alongside the program director and several of our regular volunteers. Mrs. Abernathy was there, dressed in a floral dress and looking years younger than her 82 years. Mr. Rodriguez, who taught our most popular cooking classes, had brought his famous empanadas to share. Teenagers who helped with our technology workshop sat beside seniors they'd helped master FaceTime to connect with distant grandchildren. This was my other family, the one I had chosen, the one that had chosen me back. The ceremony began with speeches from Foundation board members and community leaders. I half listened, my mind drifting to the anniversary dinner I was missing. My mother would be hurt. My father would be angry. There will be consequences for this choice. And now, the Foundation director said, pulling me back to present, the Innovation in Community Service Award, which recognizes a new program that addresses community needs in creative ways. This year's recipient has built bridges across generations, creating a space where knowledge flows in both directions and everyone has something valuable to contribute. A video began playing on the large screen behind the podium, interviews with program participants, footage of our workshops and events. I watched as Mrs. Abernathy described how teaching young people to knit had given her purpose after her husband died. A young single mother explained how learning basic plumbing from Mr. Chun had saved her hundreds in repair bills. Bridge the Gap has transformed not just individual lives, but our entire community, the narrator concluded. And it all started with one person who saw a need and took action. We invite the founder and director of Bridge the Gap, Alex Mercer, to accept this award. The applause startled me. I made my way to the stage on legs that felt like they might give out at any moment. As I accepted the crystal trophy and turned to face the audience, my prepared remarks vanished from my mind. 2 years ago, I began, my voice shakier than I would have liked. I was in a dark place. Anxiety had taken over my life, and I felt completely alone. The words poured out of me then, the truth I had never fully shared with anyone. How volunteering had been my lifeline. How each person in the program had contributed to my healing while I tried to contribute to theirs. How Bridge the Gap had saved me as much as it had helped anyone else. We talk about community service as if it's something we do for others, I concluded. But the reality is that true service creates connection, and connection is what we all need most. Thank you for this honor, and thank you to everyone who has been part of this journey. The standing ovation overwhelmed me. As I returned to my seat, people reached out to squeeze my arm or pat my shoulder. Mrs. Abernathy had tears in her eyes. Even the teenagers looked impressed, which I counted as a major victory. It wasn't until the dessert course that I finally checked my phone. 27 missed calls and texts, mostly from my mother, but a few from my brothers as well. The final text from Marcus simply read, "Mom's worried sick. Where are you?" I took a deep breath and stepped out into the hallway to call her back. Alexander James Mercer, my mother answered, her voice tight with worry and anger. "Where on earth are you?" "I'm at an award ceremony," I said, surprising myself at how steady my voice was. "For a community program I run. I'm sorry I missed the anniversary dinner, but this was important." "More important than family?" she asked, the hurt evident in her voice. "It's not a competition, Mom. This is also important to me. I've been trying to tell you all about it for 2 years, but no one ever wanted to listen." Silence stretched between us, tense and unfamiliar. My mother and I didn't have silences. We had conversations filled with her advice and my careful deflections. "What kind of program?" she finally asked, her voice quieter now. I explained Bridge the Gap as simply as I could, the intergenerational skills sharing, the community building, the ways it had grown beyond what any of us had imagined. I didn't mention my anxiety or how the program had been my salvation. Some truths would have to wait for another day. "That actually sounds wonderful," she said when I finished, surprising me. "Why didn't you tell us about this before?" I tried. I said, the words more bitter than I intended. No one was interested. Another silence, this one heavier than the last. "We're having brunch tomorrow to continue the anniversary celebration," she finally said. "Your father wants you there." It wasn't quite an apology, but for my mother, it was as close as I was likely to get. I'll be there, I promised. And Mom, I really am sorry about missing tonight. I know, sweetheart. We'll talk tomorrow. The next morning, I arrive at my parent house armed with the award, my laptop full of photos and videos, and a nervous energy that made my hand shake slightly as I rang the doorbell. My father answered, his expression unreadable. He was dressed in his church clothes, pressed slacks and a button-down shirt, though they never attended services. "You missed quite a dinner," he said, his voice gruff. "I know. I'm sorry." He studied me for a moment, then surprised me by pulling me into a hug. Something he hadn't done since I was a teenager. "Your mother told me about your award. Congratulations." The sincerity in his voice nearly undid me. In the dining room, my mother had outdone herself with a spread of breakfast foods that could have fed twice our number. My brothers were already seated, Marcus with his wife and children, Ethan alone as usual. Their conversation stopped when I entered. "The prodigal returns," Ethan said, but his smile softened the words. "I brought something to show you all," I said, placing my laptop on the sideboard and pulling up a presentation I'd hastily put together that morning. Photos from events, testimonials from participants, news clippings about our program. As my family filled their plates, I began to talk. At first, they listened with the polite interest they might show a stranger's vacation photos. But gradually, I saw a genuine curiosity dawning in their expressions. "Wait," Marcus said when I showed a photo of our Thanksgiving community dinner. "You organized all this?" I nodded, continuing through the slideshow. "And the program's expanding citywide now?" My father asked, leaning forward to see the plans we'd drawn up for the grant money. "That's the plan," I confirmed. "We're looking at partnering with the public schools, too, making it part of their community service curriculum." By the time I reached the end of the presentation, my mother was dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. Even my father looked impressed, which might have been a first. "Why didn't you tell us about any of this?" Ethan asked, echoing my mother's question from the night before. "I did try," I said, choosing my words carefully. But whenever I brought it up, the subject always changed. After a while, it just seemed easier not to mention it. An uncomfortable silence settled over the table. My mother busied herself refilling coffee cups. My father cleared his throat multiple times. Finally, Marcus spoke. "I think what Alex is saying is that we don't listen very well." "It's more than that," I said, finding courage from some hidden reserve. "You all have this image of me as someone who has it easy, who doesn't understand real struggle. You laugh off my stress or dismiss my challenges because they don't look like yours did." "That's not fair," my father began, but my mother laid a hand on his arm. "No, I think Alex might be right," she said softly. "We do compare everything to our own experiences. Maybe that's not always helpful." It was the closest thing to an epiphany I'd ever witnessed in that dining room. "Well," my father said after a moment, "your programs sound impressive, really impressive. And that award, that's something to be proud of." "Thanks, Dad. We should come see it sometime," he added, surprising me again. "See you in action." "I'd like that," I said, meaning it. The conversation shifted then to other topics: my nephew's school performances, Ethan's new job, my parents' upcoming trip to visit relatives in Arizona. But something had changed. The dynamic was different, less dismissive, more attentive. As I helped my mother clear the dishes later, she paused, hands deep in soapy water. "You know," she said, not looking at me, "I always worried about you. You were such a sensitive child. I thought if we treated your feelings too seriously, you'd never toughen up enough for the real world. And now," she smiled a small, sad smile, "now I think maybe we were wrong. That sensitivity of yours, it's what makes you good at what you do. It's your strength, not your weakness." I swallowed past a lump in my throat. "Thanks, Mom." "I'm proud of you," she added, turning back to the dishes. "We all are, even if we're not always good at showing it." The next Sunday, dinner was different. My father asked specific questions about Bridge the Gap. My mother wanted to know if she could volunteer. "I'm pretty good with a sewing machine," she reminded me. Ethan offered to help with our website, which desperately needed updating. Even Marcus, perpetually busy with his own family and career, suggested that his company might be interested in corporate sponsorship. The following week, my parents showed up at the community center, my father in a dress shirt, as if even church, my mother carrying a tray of her famous brownies. They watched our cooking workshop with interest, my father eventually rolling up his sleeves to help Mr. Rodriguez demonstrate how to properly knead bread dough. "Your dad's a natural teacher," the program coordinator whispered to me, as my father patiently showed a teenage boy how to test if the dough had risen enough. "Who knew?" I whispered back. After the workshop, as we cleaned up the kitchen, my father cleared his throat, his universal signal that he had something important to say. "I owe you an apology," he said, focusing intently on wiping down the counter. "I've been thinking about what you said, about us dismissing your struggles." I paused in my sweeping, surprised. "You were right," he continued. I didn't take the time to understand what your life is really like. I made assumptions based on nothing but my own prejudices, I guess. Coming from my father, this was the equivalent of moving mountains. "Thanks, Dad," I said. "That means a lot." He nodded, still scrubbing at a spot that was already clean. "Your mother and I are proud of what you've built here. It's important work." From him, there could be no higher praise. In the months that followed, my family became gradually integrated into Bridge the Gap. My mother joined the sewing circle. My father, surprisingly, took to teaching basic carpentry with enthusiasm. Even my brothers found ways to contribute. Marcus through his company's financial support, Ethan with his technical skills. They still don't fully understand my anxiety. There are still dinners where someone makes a comment that stings, moments when old patterns reassert themselves. Change doesn't happen overnight, especially in families with decades of established dynamics. But there's a new respect between us now, an acknowledgement that there are many forms of struggle, many forms of strength. They see me more clearly, and I see them too, not just as a family who dismiss my feelings, but as people with their own insecurities and blind spots, trying their best in their own way. Last week, at our monthly program meeting, the discussion turned to expansion plans. We need more space, more funding, more volunteer coordination. What we really need, the program director said, is someone to run this full time. All eyes turned to me. "We can't match your corporate salary," she continued. "But with the new grants coming in, we could offer something reasonable. Think about it." I promised I would. That night, I sat in my small apartment, the one my family once assumed was fancy, and made lists of pros and cons. The marketing job pays better, offers benefits, looks good on a resume. The Bridge the Gap position would mean a significant pay cut, more stress, more responsibility. But it would also mean purpose, impact, a chance to grow something meaningful. I thought about my father's hands, calloused from decades of physical labor, my mother's determination to give us better opportunities than she had, the values they raised us with, even if the execution was sometimes flawed. In the end, it wasn't really a choice at all. Tomorrow, I'll hand in my resignation at the marketing firm. Sunday, I'll announce my decision at family dinner. There will be concerns raised. My mother will worry about my financial security, my father about my professional future. But they'll support me. They understand now what this work means to me, what it means to our community. They no longer laugh at my struggles. Instead, they become part of my solution. And I've learned that sometimes the family you're born into and the family you build for yourself can become one and the same, if you're brave enough to show them who you really are and patient enough to wait for them to see it. Sometimes, the biggest struggle isn't what we face in the world, but what we hide from those we love. And sometimes, the greatest victory isn't proving others wrong, but bringing them along on your journey. I know this now.